I am going to welcome you all. My name is Sandy Hart, and I'm the president of SARA, the Spiritual and Religious Alliance for Hope. And I want to thank you on behalf of my cohorts, Ann Smith, raise your hand, Ann, and Pat Farrow, Patricia Farrow, please raise your hand. And let you know that SARA is announcing our 18th year of interfaith sisterhood and community building and seeking out new solutions to old problems, and that really ultimately disproportionately impact women and girls. While I am making this introduction, I'm also letting folks in, so thank you again for your patience. We do this, we accomplish our goals by locking arms and conforming to the highest and the deepest of our value systems, of our diverse value systems and our respected traditions. The Death Throes of Patriarchy series is our way of midwifing in a world that works for everyone, which requires us to offer hospice and a sustainable end to patriarchy. And when we follow the deep root system of those problems, we find that patriarchy that plagues not only women and girls, but all of humanity is in fact inseparable. And so when we were planning this series and we started to identify ways in which patriarchy has a grip on humanity and then shine a light on it and amplify it and like tug at that root so that it is forever gone, hopefully. We started out in this series by addressing patriarchy in form, and then we moved into the divine feminine leadership. Then we addressed the disproportionate impact on patriarchy on women and men alike, followed by a call on racism. And then we basically said, well, okay, well, religion is a driving force. It's that structure that keeps patriarchy intact, and like an unhealthy, toxic relationship of interdependence, it makes perfect sense that be here. Let me let a couple more folks in here. Thank you. And it makes sense that be the next series in our calls. And so we also know that religion is losing so much of its youth. So who better to invite to speak to us today but these two amazing millennial interfaith leaders. And before I introduce them, allow me to do just a little bit of housekeeping. Please keep yourself muted during the call, and there will be a chance for all voices to be heard, and we'll do some breakout session as well, and then bring you back for a reflection. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat box. We'll see what we can do to get to them if we have the time. We do have a half an hour following this call for what we call the after party, if you'd like to hang out. And that this call is being recorded, and that it will be edited out if anything of sensitive nature shows up. But we want you to know that you're in a safe place to dialogue freely. And also any mentions on this call, links, things like that, that you can just rest knowing that you will get them in a follow-up email along with the recording of this call. So if you missed the very beginning of the call because you came in a little late, you can catch up. So now it is my delight to invite one of our two guests, whom I will introduce shortly, Sarah Oliver, who is going to open us up with a blessing and a prayer or a poem.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation together. But to start off our time together, I wanted to read a poem from a book called, appropriately for this conversation, called Praying Like a Woman. It's by Nicholas Lee, and I'll share the details afterwards. And it's a poem about seeds and sowing of seeds. And I chose it just because you never know with these conversations what seeds might be sown. And it's hopefully a word of encouragement for the work that we're doing here and the work that we will continue to do moving forward. And so before I read it, I invite you just to take a moment to really land in this conversation. I know some of us are starting our days, some of us are ending our days on my side of the world. And just take a moment to settle, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes, do. Feel your feet on the ground and just take a breath. A deep breath in and a breath out. Another breath in and a breath out. And just notice how you're feeling in this moment, how you're feeling in anticipation of this conversation, of what might come, what emotions might be sitting in your body right now. And just feel yourself landing, grounding, and earthing in the space together as I read this poem, which is titled Sower. Here at the open gate, go on again, nothing shall be the same. All that is sown now lost at unmeasured cost, the prodigal seed scattered by warm winds and quickly gone from view. But where no eye can see, the hard, dry husk may fall, penetrate the moistness of soil, and after lying waste, expunged and erased, root in dark earth, shoot up in some unimagined field, sprouting amongst grain or weed, where unknown others walk through an open gate to gather, harvest, and feed. Sower, go on. I'll read it one more time. Sower. Here at the open gate, go on again, nothing shall be the same. All that is sown now lost at unmeasured cost, the prodigal seed scattered by warm wind and quickly gone from view. But where no eye can see, the hard, dry husk may fall, penetrate the moistness of soil, and after lying waste, expunged and erased, root in dark earth, shoot up in some unimagined field, sprouting amongst grain or weed, where unknown others walk through an open gate to gather, harvest, and feed. Sower, go on. And just taking another breath in and out, we bring ourselves to the sacred space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that beautiful blessing, and what an appropriate prayer for us. And now it's my honor in this sacred space to introduce you both appropriately. First, let me just say that there's no way that I'm going to do these two justice in this short introduction. So please make sure to see their bio on our website, and I'll also make sure you get it in a call report. We just heard from Sarah Oliver, who is the Global Youth Coordinator for the United Religions Initiative, which Sarah is a cooperation circle of and has been for the last 18 years. And her work is to connect, inspire, and support young people as interfaith activists and peace builders around the world. Based in Cape Town, South Africa, she has worked in the interfaith sector for at least 10 years and running youth camps, workshops, and skills ranging in skill trainings both locally and globally. And Tahil Sharma, who you'll be hearing from, is an interfaith activist. He's based in Los Angeles, and he was born to a Hindu father and a Sikh mother. Tahil serves as one of the 3 interfaith ministers in residence for the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, and as the Los Angeles coordinator for Sadhana, a coalition of progressive Hindus. Tahil also serves various organizations in different capacities to educate, engage, and serve various communities that promote interfaith cooperation and ethical pluralism and social and productive norms in society, including the Interfaith Youth Corps, the Parliament of the World's Religions, the Gubord Center, and the Interreligious Council of Southern California. And if any of you are familiar with interfaith work, the pedigree that these two carry is extraordinary and quite remarkable, and really an honor to welcome them here today. I am now going to hand this over to Ann. Ann Smith is going to put into context her experience and as the executive director of Women's Ministries, speaking for them to power as a parish teacher of youth where patriarchy discounts their voices. So I am happy to now hand this over to Ann.
The importance, hi everyone, the importance to me of this great moment is that we become totally aware how patriarchy has silenced for so many times. People of color's voices, youth voices, children's voices, women's voices, unless we will speak their language and hold up what patriarchy means for them. And I can certainly say, working for 17 years on the National Church of the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion, my voice was totally silenced within the patriarchy in our national church. But outside, we women had a ball. We created a non-patriarchal events and leadership programs and believed in ourselves and did feminist theology. We were wild and wonderful, but we were outside the system and discounted. When I served as a Sunday school teacher, and it was called Journey to Adulthood, and this is 13 to 19, 18, they gave us the room in the kitchen. In the kitchen, people would walk in and out, and we were a sacred circle, and these young people were in circle, and they were sharing on the deepest level what was going on in their lives. And there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of just things going on that they wanted to share. And people would come in, and it'd be like, they wouldn't do that. They would never do that if that was an adult forum. They wouldn't put us in the kitchen. So it was, again, how young people are discounted in our churches. And it is, so one of the things that is a trigger for me to hear is when you say they are the leaders of the future. No, they're the leaders for right now, and we need to listen to them. Just listen to what they have already been doing for 10 years and where they've been, and they're speaking not only for themselves and their own experience, but they're speaking on behalf of other youth. Because they've been in those circles of youth that have been places where the youth can really speak what's on their hearts. And the youth can be creative. Now, the churches are dying because they want to be the same old. And just as Sarah said that beautiful poem about us being the seeds and that open gate, the only way there's going to be an open gate is for the young people to help lead the way. And that doesn't mean that we play a passive role. That means we learn to listen and learn from and support. And so that's why I'm so excited about this. And I'm so excited about having this message out. I also serve on a UN accredited organization called Earthchild Institute, in which children's voices, for the first time about 10 years ago, were heard at the UN. Now it's become a norm. And at the UN, now it's become normal for the youth to speak to the United Nations. Our churches and our communities and our families need to hear that message. So here we are in this wonderful sacred setting where we're going to be able to hear from Sarah and Tehil. Then we're going to be able to break up into small circles, and I will tell you about that reflection time. So just, here we are in this magic carpet to hear this incredible, to have this incredible experience. So, Pat, I think you were going to ask the first question. Muted.
I had to do it because my dog was barking. So now hopefully he won't bark anymore. it's so fun for me to be here. And I've been thinking about this call quite a bit. We've had three calls together with Sarah and Tahil, and I have learned so much. So as a 72-year-old woman, I am here to learn, and I am so excited to be here and asking this first question, which is, whoever wants to go first, what is the vision of young people for inclusive and meaningful religious institutions? And maybe I think what I'm going to do is ask Tahil. We usually do ladies first. I'll reverse that. So Tahil, would you answer that question for us first? You're muted too.
You're muted. There you go.
That was a curveball. I was expecting like, oh yes, Sarah would go ahead, and I'm like, oh, got it. There you go. That's what I gotta get used to. It makes sense. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's such an honor and privilege to be in this space with you all. To answer your question, Pat, what we are looking for from religious institutions is two things. One is actually living into the tradition of justice. And two, it's making sure that that justice is rooted in mutual accountability. Now, that might sound really cliche in a lot of ways because we always have these roots of justice oriented with many of our traditions. But unfortunately, our institutions have not necessarily lived into those realities. When I say living with a tradition of justice, I am talking about the scriptures, the communities, and the legacies that have always helped support and uplift those in need. That's something that I have noted a lot of religious communities are very guilty of not participating in, because they're very comfortable with this idea that their power and their privileges grant them immunity to doing this kind of work. And the fact of the matter is we are actually inviting religious institutions to live into their tradition of justice. I come from a dual religious background where one community that is thousands of years old, which is focused on the Vedas, which is focused on yoga and many other traditions and practices, often is the one that purports something as oppressive as the caste system, which allows for a social hierarchy that does not allow people to escape the realities of what you can do in your lifetime. And at the same time, it is the same religion that purports nonviolence, it purports duality, non-duality and pluralism, and it promotes this idea that everyone has their singular pursuit and can achieve liberation. When you have a social hierarchy in place that also not only just divides society up, but further puts women at a lower pedestal than everyone else, what expectation of equity can we find from these spaces? One would say absolutely none. But in the work that I do in not just looking at Hinduism for what it has to offer of value, but to actually offer a reconstructionist process to how Hinduism functions and flourishes, it requires a responsibility on my part to look towards my colleagues and communities and tell them, what are we still doing that is not empowering and inspiring women? What are we still doing that is actually not honoring the feminine divine that is equally a part of us? And what are we continuously doing to say that if in a society where we propose that women are equal, but we don't show it in any sort of provable empirical way, how do we actually pursue it? As a Hindu, as someone who does deeply believe in the feminine divine, as a Shakta myself, that takes more than just these small actions of participating on calls and being able to talk to theologians about the ways that this functions. There has to be a paradigm shift in how the community behaves around things like rape culture and victimization, around making sure that women are present and equally in leadership in workplaces when they are a part of the conversation on major changes and movements around the world. It's not just about celebrating a woman a single day. It's about celebrating women every day in an equal way with equal pay. Sorry for the rhyme. I didn't intend on doing that, but it happened. And from a Sikh tradition, which has actually been from the beginning from Guru Nanak, pushing this idea that there must be gender equity, that there must be egalitarianism, there is still a cultural norm which is very patrilineal, that is still very much in the power of men. And it takes spaces where we call that out to say that, well, actually, we were taught from Guru Nanak's time that men sit at the left and women sit at the right of the throne of God. So if there is that genuine equality, why do we not see it? Why do we become so culturally comfortable or socially comfortable with this idea that men take control and that men take leadership, and then it leads to the cycle of abuse? This is where we need to discover the deeper parts of toxic masculinity, toxic leadership, and where men should be a part of the solution, supporting and empowering women, rather than taking the helm and saying, this is how women should be, this is how women should go forward. And with that, I'll wrap up my initial remarks and pass it over to my colleague, Sarah.
Would you like me to read the question again, Sarah?
I think I'm okay about the vision of young people, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, thank you. And thank you, Tahil, for starting us off. I really appreciate the way that, the vision that you've described of centering inclusivity and justice is exactly where my heart is as well. And I know in our work together, that's been an important part of the work that we do. And so I think, from my side, just to start off, and I know, Tahil, you'd agree with me, I think it is important to say that we don't speak on behalf of all young people in this conversation. Like any social group, young people are not a homogenous group. And I just want to invite everyone on this call, like if this is the first time that you're hearing from young people speaking about this topic, listen to what we have to say, but then go and ask the young people in your community what they think and engage with them on dialogue around this. And my second just disclaimer to make before I start is that this topic comes with a lot of emotion. And I just want to acknowledge that because even, we've been meeting for almost a month now in preparation for this conversation, and it's churned up a lot in me. And I just invite everybody again to stay present with the emotions that might come up and that are real in this conversation. So like Tahil said, I mean, we bring a particular lens, and Tahil has a unique perspective to this conversation. And I would just say from mine, so I'm a young woman. I live in South Africa. I'm a white woman living in South Africa. And I think it's important to recognize our intersecting identities in this conversation as well. And so it gives me a particular lens to how I come to the topic. In terms of my religion, I bring the lens of contemplative Christianity. I grew up in an Anglican church. My dad was an Anglican priest. And so we were, I'd help out my mom with the Sunday school. And however, my dad was not always accepted, let's say, by the rest of the Anglican church community, because he was very involved in interfaith work and pushed the boundaries where he could in terms of building bridges between communities. And so that really laid the foundation for my interfaith work and for finding a passion in creating spaces of conversation and dialogue between people of different religions and cultures. And at the heart of it, really, that it being driven by the heartache that is social injustice and that exists in our world. And so I say this just to frame the kind of young people that I'm interacting with and working with on a daily basis are young people who are interested in similar sorts of things. And so the conversation of religion is a very prominent one. And so while I've heard it be said at the beginning how, you know, young people are leaving the church or leaving religion because of, I mean, all the issues that we're talking about, and particularly patriarchy, I think I'm in a unique position to see young people who are leaning into religion and calling for change and calling for the inclusivity and the justice that that Tahil has referenced and spoken to. To give you a little anecdote of this, we run a youth program with a diverse group of there are 16-year-olds, and one of the activities that we do on our camps is to ask people a intentionally controversial statement, and then the room is set up with agree and disagree, and the young people have to choose where they sit on that particular question. And one of the topics is, or the statement rather, is religion does more harm than good. Do you agree or do you disagree? And there's always this amazing spectrum of views and perspectives that come out. And what does come out of that is particularly the harm that religion has done in terms of gender expression and gender identity for young people. And so that's a reality that we need to acknowledge. And at the same time, you have young people who are really redefining the spaces of religion and spirituality to center inclusivity, to center indigeneity, and to call for that change. How that looks like in my own life in terms of the vision that I see, like I mentioned, I grew up in an Anglican church, and I think the Anglican church will always be my base. However, I now identify more as, like I said, part of a contemplative Christian community, and particularly that of Taizé. I'm very much drawn to spaces of silence and meditation and seeking God in those spaces. I also follow Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and the Art of Living Foundation, and have a daily practice of Sudarshan Kriya. But just as a practical example of, I think, what this vision of transformation in religious spaces can be, the Taizé group that I'm a part of runs in a way where it really promotes shared leadership. And so we have different people leading or guiding rather the services each time. And so every couple of months, my mum and I actually lead the service together. And I know my mum's on this call, so we'll give a shout out to her at this moment. But just to say that in our leading of these spaces, we've intentionally done it to be intergenerational, to challenge that idea that a religious leader has to be, an older person. And it's become a beautiful opportunity for us to work collaboratively and really design a sacred experience. So we try and be intentional about the language that we use, and making sure that we're using gender inclusive language and not referencing God with any sort of male pronoun or identity in that way. We shift up the version of the Lord's Prayer that we say at the end. And so this is just an example of I think the starting point in shifting our spaces of particularly religious institutions is that of liturgy and language, and how can we make our language more inclusive so that everyone sees themselves as part of it. I mean, in Christianity, patriarchy goes right back to the creation story of Adam and Eve, and the whole debate about what it means to be made in the image of God. And so I think taking that starting point and really making that image of God as inclusive as possible is what we need to be doing. So I think I'm just echoing this vision of inclusivity and justice that we want to see.
See, this is why we need to listen to young voices. one of the hardest things, I will say, in the Episcopal and Anglican Church is to get the inclusive language. You know, we have the New Zealand prayer book for that wonderful alternative to the Lord's Prayer. But we don't have a lot of other things. And one of the things I also know, what has enhanced the Episcopal and Anglican communion is bringing in the cultural gifts of all the different cultures for the music. You know, the music and how they do church, how we do Black church versus how we do the very staid English church. But we do still have a problem with bringing in liturgies and prayers that will say Mother God. You know, and so I really love that you were reading from this book, which I can't wait to have. You know, that anyway, I just have to speak for my own church in Florida. It's God is he, everything. So how do you help people really to understand that when you can be in those positions? And I know, Sarah, your father is a priest, so you can talk to him. And Cahill, both of you are in those circles where you have the voice to be heard. So just how do you do that in a way that they can see it as a gift and is so important and not taking away from their traditional way of doing things? Either one, jump in.
That's a very good question. And because this is where I think we often feel like people are all speaking the same language. And the fact of the matter is when I'm in interfaith community, I don't speak the same language than when I'm with my own communities of faith. Because they don't translate the same way, even if it's the same language. So what I often have to do is in an interfaith space where I often know that I am sharing shoulder to shoulder with many other folks who give reflections, I often invoke the feminine divine in those spaces by, reciting and chanting mantras from books like the Durga Saptashati, which is sort of the main text for those that follow the feminine divine in Hinduism. I actually have a copy right here that I like to refer to very often. On the front, you'll actually see the image of the goddess Durga with all of her might, because she's supposed to be the goddess that it shows that triumph over evil is always possible, and that she is the slayer of ego in particular. Her story is that she slays a demon called Mahishasur, who is given a boon that only a woman will be able to kill you. And in his own ego and arrogance, he actually forgets that and thinks that he can take over all of creation. And when the gods and goddesses can't defeat him individually, they put all of their power together, literally of millions of gods and goddesses, to create the goddess Durga, who manifests into the feminine, who manifests into a woman who is wielding all of these different weapons and actually slays him. So it's not merely just a story of a woman killing a man, quote unquote. It is actually the point that his ego is being destroyed, because at the end of the day, as being a part of creation, that demon became a part of her. That is the idea within Hinduism that oftentimes gets really pushed aside, because the focus is on, she is very famous because she slayed a demon. Well, actually, it's much greater than that. Since she is the very epitome of power, of energy, that demon, once his ego was destroyed, became back a part of her again. And there's a story of a particular sage that actually is central to my practice when I actually am talking to Hindus and non-Hindus about understanding the importance of the feminine divine. There is a sage known as Sage Bringi, who is a worshiper of the god Shiva, or Lord of Destruction. And he goes to his feet one day while sitting next to his wife Parvati. Rishi Bringi sort of scorns and scowls at the goddess because he doesn't like her at all. And he's like, I'm not interested in talking to you. I'm not going to worship you or do anything like that. The Lord Shiva says, well, you are insulting my wife. You know that she is my equal. There's no one that's closer to me than her. And if you actually had faith in me, you would see my face looking at her. And he says, well, I still don't believe her. I can't just imagine anyone as comparable to you. And the god and goddess look at each other. And their energies begin to come together, and they form a new manifestation, which is known as Ardhanarishwar, which is literally the half of both of the divine beings, which means that in every part of creation, there is equally masculine and feminine things swaying and moving and being in energy together. The audacity of the sage was to turn into a wasp or a bee. And mind you, this is mythology, so take it as such, don't take it in any literal way. Turns into a wasp and actually only flies around the masculine Shiva side of that new deity and comes back to the ground. Because he just refuses to worship the female deity. They form back into their original manifestations, and the goddess says, all right, you don't want to deal with anyone feminine, you don't want to deal with women, you don't want to acknowledge me, then here's my blessing. I will let you continue live your life without me, and you can go forward. When she gives the blessing, he turns into ashes. And he says, oh my gosh, what's happened to me? My energy, my strength, my ability to hold a physical form is gone. I'm nothing. And she said, exactly. If people understood that these stories are a part of the Hindu theology, that there is an existence and telling process that tells us that the feminine energy, that the feminine divine, that women are an equal manifestation of us, that we are an equal manifestation of them, that we are an equal part of a creation, then that does help shift narratives. It helps shifts understanding. It helps shifts and creates a more supportive and mutual process in trying to create a better world. And unfortunately, I think to a point that Sarah was mentioning earlier, it is very much a part of the liturgical and language process within communities, just as it is for bridge building processes for interfaith communities. We are still trying to figure this out, by multitasking. And at the end of the day, it takes getting to hear that kind of mythology exists. It's not something new. It's literally thousands of years old, just as much as the patriarchy is. So that's why we're saying we're living into tradition again. We don't have to recreate the wheel. It's already there. The fact is, patriarchy has just veiled us in understanding that there is an equal powerful experience that we haven't lived into properly, and that we need to reclaim it for what it is. Genuinely ours, genuinely a part of our tradition.
Yeah, thanks it's such a good question. And I think, Tahil, I agree with you that I find it easier to have these conversations in interfaith spaces often than within my, own Christian homes, as it were. Because of the courage that it takes and the boundaries that one is pushing. I think I think I spoke a little bit about the changing of the language and some examples of that, but building on that, I think what we're seeing from young people is really calling for that inquiry and the questioning of kind of like, where do these, like Tahil has said, the history of our traditions and kind of where they come from. But I think we're done just accepting things like they are. We're part of ending of patriarchy is ending that acceptance of, well, this is the way we do things, and it's not going to change. And I think that attitude is going to continue to turn a lot of young people away from religious spaces. And instead, what we're calling for, this, this new paradigm, this just new way of thinking about our religious traditions. I mean, our institutions have such an opportunity here to really listen to what's being said, and to really welcome that invitation to look inwards and to look critically at your own tradition and your own practices, and to think about how they're perpetuating the patriarchy that we see in society, how they're contributing to rape culture, how they're playing into gender stereotypes, how they're all of that, how they're contributing to gender-based violence. I'm hoping we're going to have a moment to kind of address that, because it's a really important part of this conversation. But yeah, the point of there's an opportunity here for our religious institutions and traditions to look inwards and think about what it is that they're offering to people. I think, I mean, again, these conversations are conversations my mom and I have often, and she said to me last weekend, actually, she said, what if our religious institutions ask for feedback forms? I mean, have you ever been in a religious space where you've been asked to give feedback on a service or an experience? And everywhere else we're asked for feedback. And if we could really, that could be a conversation that we could engage in, I think there would be there would be a lot more movement towards the inclusivity that we're craving and needing.
That's a really good point, because I'm wondering, when we worked in women's ministries, we did radical, wonderful, inclusive liturgies, but the men weren't a part of it, or women who were not a part of that kind of setting that we had, who were more stuck in the patriarchy. If they had, they'd see how wonderful it was. And, so it's like, how can we, there's two questions here. One is, and I want to get back into the gender violence too, because I love the video, and if we don't have time for this video, we'll have everybody see it. But I had said several times, this was with a whole lot of archbishops and etc. in the Anglican Communion, that not until we really respect the divine and hold up the divine feminine will we stop rape of women and rape of the land. And one of the things I also said when we were talking the other day, and then your video comes out, when we harm women, we're harming God. Just think of that. When we create violence against women, we're creating violence against our Creator, the Holy of Holies. So, is it possible? Well, certainly we'll try with this, but is it possible for them to see the beauty that they'll also have? It's predicted by 2050, there will be no religious institutions left, period. That's how drastic this message is. And I love my Episcopal Church. There's lots that I love. I don't want it to disappear, but I want it to be just. I want it to have the divine feminine masculine. And I want them to experience what you all get to experience in your youth networks. How do we bring that to the patriarchy so they experience and they will say, oh my God, this is so wonderful. I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining something. Okay, take it over. I don't have any answers.
Sarah, do you want to answer that first?
Would you like me to?
No, it was genuinely a question either way.
Let me start it off and then you can. For me, I mean, it really comes down to how are we healing our gender wounds, and we all have wounds. I think that's the important thing to recognize, and it needs to be a process where everyone's included in that healing. whether men, women, gender non-conforming, however you identify, everyone has a story and an experience, and has been affected by the systems of patriarchy that exist. And so it's, I mean, I would love to see, spaces of religion creating more spaces for healing, creating more spaces, working with organizations that are doing such powerful work. I mean, I do a little bit of work with Gender Equity and Reconciliation International, and their work is incredibly powerful in terms of bringing all people together to really think about what that wound is. I mean, in this country of South Africa, the wound runs so deep. I was, just last weekend running a workshop on gender-based violence, and it was very small because of COVID precautions as well. We were, 6 or 7 people in the room, all young women, and the weight of the pain and the fear and the anger that these young women are carrying on a daily basis in this country is heartbreaking and terrifying. And but there was just such a need for spaces of healing and connection. So I think it can't be separate spaces. I mean, separate spaces are definitely useful and helpful in terms of women's spaces and men's spaces, but ultimately how are we addressing the wound is what I would say to that.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Sarah, I think one of the ways of addressing the wound, and I invite some discomfort on this response that I might give, is to actually see some institutions, be hit in their sore spot and collapse. And this is not to say that every institution is like this at the end of the day. But the reason why a lot of these institutions may cease to exist in 2050 is because of the factor of relevance and inclusion that they still continue to not push for.
Yeah.
I am a sore believer that religion is neither a monolith nor a stagnant experience. It's something that's always changing. It's something that's always adapting. And it's something that people will always be able to create a space for themselves. And if institutions currently that have been standing up for centuries, if not millennia, are choosing not to be a part of relevance, they will then just become a part of history. That's what they have to look at the end of the day. It's not our job to, just hold an institution up just for the sake of convenience if it's not really living into its tradition of justice. And that's precisely why I use that term very solidly, that these institutions may need to fall. I'm saying this as an anti-caste Hindu, where there are spaces that people don't believe I can exist, because they will tell me that if there is no caste system, there is no Hinduism. And if people are telling me that I may need to have a new tradition that can live into those traditions without having caste, I'm okay with that, because I do want to live in an equitable society. I don't want to live in a society that's associated with social hierarchy. And if that means at the end of the day that Hinduism needs to perish in its modern form, I'm completely okay with that, because God doesn't care about the institution. God will live on. God will find new ways to adapt and form. Shakti continues to be Shakti for me without the fact that I'm oppressing other people. And I actually would much prefer that. And this is where I think men need to be better. This is where men really need to be better. Because at the end of the day, the stringentness and the rigidness of major religious institutions comes from the men at the helm of power. They are comfortable with their privileges. They are comfortable with their ability to dictate how others can live and control their bodies and do so many other things. And I, as a man, am saying that that's enough. And it's hard to say that knowing that there is still a control within society of men who decide theology, decide rules, decide legislation, decide justice, decide so many of these things that continue to make society the way that it is. And this makes me think of, an experience that I had in the past couple of years with a case that had to do with the United Methodist Church. Some of you in the US might have heard about this case, maybe not. I want to share this case with a discretion that if you're not comfortable hearing about it, that you're more than happy to step away from the space or to take a break, because this has to do with an abusive man who had taken advantage of a number of women who were my friends and colleagues. But long story short, an elder by the name of Bud Heckman, who became very popular in Methodist and very, very popular in interfaith spaces, began to abuse women of many ages and many communities because of his influence in the interfaith movement, by inviting them to be involved with him in more physical ways. What we originally thought was a red flag from a singular conference in 2018 actually became a pattern of over 18 women that were harassed by this man, that led to a major case in the Methodist Church that was going to hold him accountable. What ended up happening with the case was the case got shut down by the what is considered the specific convention in Western Ohio of the Methodist Church, without the consultation of the survivors, saying that we're just going to make him retire because he's done anyway. Like, we'll just put him to the side. We're not actually going to do anything about it. This actually caused a lot of rage for many obvious reasons. But the rage that was brought up by Methodist clergy women.
Yeah.
They brought up the case to open up the case again and say, no, we need accountability from this man. You're just retiring him because he's not doing anything now. You've just made him keep everything that he has. He hasn't lost his credentials. He hasn't lost his influence. He hasn't lost his power. What have you done by making him retire? And I got very upset, not only because many of the survivors were my own loved ones, were my own colleagues and friends, but I also knew the perpetrator, and the fact that he wasn't being held accountable pissed me the hell off. So as a response, I actually launched an interfaith petition to also reopen the case and support the clergy women to open the case. And we were able to garner hundreds of signatures from around the country, from major faith leaders to denominational heads to congregants from multiple faith traditions. And we actually reopened the case and overturned that previous decision, and we made him lose his credentials. He cannot sit in the Methodist Church anymore and be considered a leader in the church ever again. And that will tarnish his record for any attempt he tries to make in trying to be a part of another Christian community. The point of that story is a couple of things. One, men have to hold men accountable for their actions. And that continues to not be a norm in interfaith spaces, but in society in general. If men are doing terrible actions to women, they need to stop, full stop. There's no excuses, there's no justification, there is no time of day, type of dress, anything like that that's going to ever justify that kind of behavior. But two, when men are comfortable in their power and they get their chair pulled under from them, it causes a ripple effect. I learned about the religious community leaders, men and women, who were not willing to sign because they were very comfortable in their position and their relationship with him. That got me even more upset. But what happens is when one chair falls, other chairs begin to fall as well. And we're beginning to see a wave happening in the Me Too movement in the interfaith context that's slowly happening that is going to knock over other chairs. So stay tuned for that because it's going to be an interesting experience. But three, when we honor this idea of solidarity, we have to mean it. We cannot be bystanders just because it's not affecting us personally. And that's a deep reflection that is, it's not just something that we should do by standing up for others. It's a mandate. It's a moral mandate on all of us. If we're not fighting for others, we are not honoring God. That is tradition to me. And that's something we have to keep living into if we really want to make a difference in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah, and one of the things I just wanted to bring up, exactly what you said, Tahil, because we could all walk away and I can just be a part of my women's spirituality groups, and they're wonderful. But when you think that there are 7.5 billion people in the world and more than 6 billion people relate to some form of religion, we need to be the voice, like you have just said, we need to be able to be the voice that stops the abuse. And then maybe be also the voice that can bring out a different vision. So Sarah, would you want to add to this? And because you want to kind of combine your Anglican, but also with the Taizé and the contemplative. So you're doing both, which that's where I am too, and the interfaith is so wonderful, because when I bring in the interfaith or learn the other faiths traditions in that, I'm enhancing my own religious practice. So Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you, Anne. Like, part of the reason I do interfaith work is that it asks you to turn the lens back on your own beliefs and your own religion. And I just love learning from colleagues like Tahil. Every day it's just like I'm learning something new, and it's a chance to think about, so what does that look like from my perspective. But just, I think, speaking about kind of movements of change and solidarity and supporting each other in this work, I wanted to bring in an example of particularly the Anglican woman clergy in this country. I'm lucky to have some incredible mentors in my life, many of whom happen to be female clergy, which is a real honor. And some of them, particularly Reverend Natalie, she was involved in a statement that was put together by a group of women clergy in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, and they wrote a statement basically calling out the Anglican Church on their silence in terms of gender-based violence in this country. And so, for those of you who don't know, I mean, we have one of the highest rates of gender-based violence here in South Africa, and to the point that our president recently recognized it as the second pandemic that we have. I mean, I'm not going to say at the moment, because it has been happening for a very long time. It just hasn't had the same awareness as it does, I would say, now. So yeah, the pandemic of gender-based violence and the pandemic of COVID-19 is, the current kind of reality. And in this reality, a group of women clergy got together to write a statement that they called Gatvol yet hopeful. Now, Gatvol is a beautiful South African word. It's in Afrikaans, which means at its root kind of deep frustration, but it's deeper than just simply frustration. Like, there isn't a direct kind of translation of it, but I think you can feel in the word. And this is what they were expressing. And I'll share a link to the statement that was put out, but it's movements like this. It's people who are or who are really turning the lens inwards and challenging the conversations within their own circles that I think we need to stand in solidarity with and work within. So it is an interesting space that we move between our religious spaces and then interfaith spaces as well. But it's a unique opportunity, again, just to share these learnings that come from it. So for interest, I'll share the statement that was put out there. And again, their call is for the church to critically reflect on their own practices and the perpetuating of gender-based violence that particularly in Christianity happens. Yeah.
And Sandy, do you have that video ready? Because I think right now the one that Shahil had found us that shows all the different faith groups. And then after we get to see this video, then we're going to break into on our small groups of 3, and we're going to be able to reflect on everything we've heard and how we can help in this whole area of getting young people's voices in the mix and everything else. But this is a really, thank you. This is a really good video, I think, as a resource. She's getting it ready, and we'll have it.
It was all queued up. I apologize. It was all queued up and it disappeared. So give me a moment.
Well, I should have given you a warning ahead of time. But
Did you I don't get it. I'm sorry. It's
did you
coming.
have any question while that you wanted to just, or anything that you wanted to bring into the mix before we are waiting for this?
Here it is. I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. Oh, hold on. We're gonna start that over. Sorry.
Violence
Okay.
against women is violence against Islam.
Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. The Sikh religion teaches to honor all women.
Jesus treated women with love and grace.
The native tradition respects the wisdom of our women because they are sacred.
As a Christian,
As a Baha'i,
As a man of faith,
I want my son to know
I want my kids to know
I want all generations to know the violence against women and girls.
is wrong.
it's wrong.
it's wrong.
it's wrong.
Violence against women is violence against God.
The men that treat women these ways are confused and lost and are doing evil to themselves.
Real men do not hurt women.
I want my son to know that the real man should treat women with respect, dignity, and equality.
Women are to be respected, honored, and revered.
I want my son to know
I want my son to know
I want my son to know that men never have to use violence.
we need to respect the wisdom of women.
we need to listen to the wisdom of our Mother Earth.
We need to put an end to violence against women and girls.
Now,
Put an end to the violence.
Now.
The violence, it needs to end.
Now.
It has to end.
Now.
Now. Now.
The violence against women and girls and Mother Earth has to end now.
So now we're going to go into the small circles of 3. Those who have been on our calls before, you know the drill. But you'll have one person who will start out. And you start out by certainly saying your name, where you're from, and then begin the question. There's 2 questions. What has stood out for you in these incredible listening process that we have been in to these young people? And then how do you see yourself helping to bring young people's voices into the mix? And that, if you're not connected to a religious institution, think about your community. Even think about your family. Think about any institution that you have, city council. I mean, any place and every place where decisions are made that affect us as human beings. Okay, so and then you'll have one person keeping the time because you're each going to have 5 minutes. And then one person who at the end will begin to just kind of take all the nuggets, sort of the highlights, and we're going to bring that back into the group, the whole group. And then we'll begin to have that conversation around that so that we can look at the collective wisdom and the collective intentions and all of that. So is that pretty clear? Okay, Sandy, do you want to put them in there? Off you go, and then we'll see you again.
Off you go.
I want to ask the question of that video, Tehil, that you probably have shown that other places. Have you? And what kind of response have you had?
This is actually the first time I've shown it, and it immediately came up to mind when we were having these conversations. And I was like, where is that video? This video, I think, fits into exactly what we're trying to talk about. And I searched it up and I'm like, oh, there it is. This is the one I was thinking about. I wasn't imagining things. So this is the first time I've ever actually shared it. I know that from other spaces where the video might have been shown, it's gotten a lot of pause from people because I think it makes you think a lot. Because the words, I think, cut much deeper in this video than I think in other ones that I think talk about this kind of stuff. Referring to the fact that attacking women is attacking God, that people are coming from a place of confusion, and those kinds of things that we actually don't think about, but that need to be really centered when men are talking to men about abuse and toxic masculinity and those kinds of things. I think it's so important that we continue to push for that kind of message, because when we hold our own accountable, which is everyone, it makes a difference. It always does.
Tahil, can I ask you like how you respond to the language of real men? Because that struck me in the video watching it this time, and I know just as a tool of like engaging, it's quite an interesting one, right? Because it's like, so what is this idea of a real man? And I know here it's been used in campaigns to advocate for men's involvement in, kind of anti-gender-based violence campaigns. But whenever I hear it, there's something in me that just goes like, I'm not sure. And
yes.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. Actually, that's precise. The term real men is always used to talk about trying to push for patriarchy and masculinity. Because oftentimes you will hear that, oh, real men fight with their hands and not with a weapon. Real men can pick up women and da-da-da-da-da. Real men, like, shave with a straight single razor as opposed to something else.
Or smoke Marlboro.
Yeah, exactly. So, they'll smoke Marlboro. They'll put this cologne. They'll do this. They'll do that. The reaction to hearing that real men don't hurt women cuts deeper than any of those things, because you're actually attacking the masculinity that they were so comfortable with, that challenges the status quo of how men usually feel about how they are emboldened or made confident by the things that they do. Because all of the things that I talked about are really like superficial and like non-essential. When you say that a real man doesn't attack women, it makes a man uncomfortable. And that's the kind of discomfort we're actually trying to push for, because that's what's transformative. Instead of talking about something superficial, you're actually saying, no, I'm telling you that your behavior is incumbent upon this, that you do not attack women. And the point that I want to make when people come back is that, this idea that we're creating a saintlyhood for advocating for women's rights as men is like, I hate to put it this way, but we should not be incentivizing the most basic behavior that men should have. Men should treat women equally, should not be violent to them. Those are regular, decent, basic things that we're doing. Incentivizing them, unfortunately, loses the value of what is genuinely supposed to be a part of a paradigm shift.
Yeah, I guess there's a danger of it sometimes moving into like real men protect women, and real men, which still then reinforces this idea of possession, right? And that women are fragile and that women need, real men don't sometimes it crosses that line for me.
Right. Yeah. And if you say like real men are in touch with their emotions, or real men are not always straight, or the list can keep going, and you will make typical men very uncomfortable because they're like, I don't know how to respond to that. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. And that's where you start. That's where you start chipping at them. That's where you start the deconstruction process, because they have to dig deeper. They're not being given a choice. They're not focusing on things that are superficial now. They now have to look inside and be introspective. They have to think about the ways that they say things and do things and think about things and feel about things, so that they really understand that, oh, it's not about being a real man. It's actually about just being a human being.
Yeah. When you incentivize it, you make it special. You make it unique.
Right.
Yeah, it's basically the basic deduction of that is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like paying attention to breathing in and out. It just needs to be a part of our biocultural being. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what happens. That's how habits happen, right? You don't even have to think about them. They're just there. Right? Yeah. I think this is such a gift, what you have done, the two of you, and Anne as well. Your facilitation has been really great. I think that this is really, if we're going to address ending patriarchy, then we have to have this conversation, and they had to hear it from you guys.
Yeah, and so if everybody could just kind of do their highlights of what was spoken in their group, because we don't have a lot of time, we'll have to finish right at, it's 1:19 after, and we'll at 25 after, we have to do the wrap up. So we got about 6 minutes. Okay? Just go for it. Make sure you're up.
Okay, I can go if that's okay. Hi there. Yes, I'll just share quickly what we talked about. We were all very impressed with Sarah and Sahil, and also feeling hopeful that, to see these ideas and thoughts coming from our youth. It was also expressed that there was quite a bit of joy and comfort in feeling and hearing Tahil's words, especially being a man, expressing the things that he expressed, and the actions that you have taken as well, Tahil, are very much appreciated. And the same for you, Sarah. Everything that you are doing is quite impressive, and again, hope-giving. It was also expressed in our group that we see a shift coming, and perhaps very naturally, because younger generations see very clearly the mistakes that have been made in the past, and it's also very clear that they have no intention on repeating them. So, so thank you all.
Okay, the next group. Jump in. Make sure you're not on mute. In fact, you can all unmute yourself right now anyway.
Perhaps I'll just jump in very quickly. I was in a group with Barbara. There were just the two of us. Barbara's in San Francisco, and the connection wasn't all that good, but we had a really interesting conversation. Maybe she wants to, because the connection wasn't that good, we haven't got that much to feedback, except that it was excellent to talk to her. She was walking in San Francisco.
She's still here. I can hear her.
She's walking.
Well,
it was fascinating because I was so impressed with her daughter, who was so articulate and kind. And she said, "We're all wounded." And I also was fascinated with that the violence in South Africa against women is considered a pandemic, and that South Africa, because I'm ignorant about South Africa, has one of the highest rates of rape and murder of women a day. But her daughter was very hopeful, and so it's good that it's wonderful that people are at least aware. And we also talked about the use of he and the masculine as goddess. And I think that's really fascinating. And I just found his talk on the feminine energy as being God. And if people aren't going to be just in their religions with social justice, like the caste system, then maybe it needs to go. So it was really fun.
Great, thank you. We must have another, how many more groups do we have? One more group?
I'm not sure, but I'll jump in.
Okay.
So I'm Babalwa, I'm from South Africa, and I have the wonderful privilege of working with Sarah in the interfaith space. And yeah, I think it was wonderful to thank you for organizing such an amazing talk. It was wonderful to hear from Tahil's experience, and obviously having a male voice talking in this space about the work and activism that he's doing. And also Sarah, just brilliant, bringing us into the heart place of what, patriarchy really is, not just in our religious spaces, but, deeply entrenched in our social kind of and community spaces as well. I think I was really, I just really found it powerful, just the contributions. I think I was in a group with Alyssa, and we really spoke about, what, the language, I think that came up today, around patriarchy, especially in religion, and how much it defines so much of, how we relate to each other across the gender lines. And, it was just about, how do we remove those barriers that can help us, Alyssa brought up, help us see the divine in each other, right? And move beyond a lot of the labels that are there, and how that affects our relationships with each other. But also particularly speaking about the South African context, with the gender-based violence being so high, declared a pandemic, I think one thing that we spoke about is, there's this language around the role of men being, to protect women. And again, it gives this unequal, almost like power balance to it, right? Is that men are kind of hovering over us, trying to take care of us. And I think our conversation was more around, or I wish at least that the conversation that men was having is how do we allow women the space to take up their own agency, right? To be able to use their own voices and their own actions and have control over their own bodies to do what they need to do in the name of the divine, or of their divine purpose. And, that's something we don't see a lot in the conversation around patriarchy, in that, the role of men doesn't necessarily have to be there putting on those macho masculine suits of, I'm a Superman, I need to protect, I need to be a hero. But it's almost like, how do we step aside and let the women be the heroes that they are for their own lives? Right. And so, that's part of what I hope we can do in this conversation. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
We have just a short period of time, so if the group, the last group, could just kind of do any highlights that you haven't heard before that haven't been raised up, because then we're running out of time. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was in with Kirshna and Heidi, and we spoke about how it's wonderful to have this kind of forum and to address these things and to be with kindred spirits in hearing and seeing what groups are doing. Kirshna came because he was invited by Tahil, and he really wants to know more about what we're doing. Heidi shared very personal experience dealing with violence. It was very moving. And I just said how I'm involved in some work, and these kind of groups, especially in the time of COVID, give me so much support and ways to do better what I'm trying to do in dealing with the systemic problems in our society.
Thank you very much. And I think we're missing one group, but I know if we can go just a few minutes over time, is that all right, Sandy, do you think? Or do we want to have this be in the after party? Because I think we're missing one group's report.
I got all the time. It's with everybody else here. Perhaps we can close our circle and then
let's do that.
Let's do that,
Yeah.
and you can ring the bell.
And then we'll have that on the recording, and then we will close the circle, and then we're going to have our after party where we can continue this conversation because it's so rich.
Yeah, and just for those who might have to go who didn't schedule that extra half hour. First, thank you to our brilliant speakers. You've all said it for me. A round of blessings and applause to both of them, and deep gratitude. And Emma, they say your children come through you, but let me bow deeply to you as mother of Sarah. And I'm doing the same figuratively for Tehil and your parents too. Just as a mom, I can't not do that. I want to just thank you all for being here. Your contribution, your ears, your heart, your hands and your feet that are making a big difference in the world. I want to make sure that you know how appreciated you are for being here and being willing to hear what our speakers had to say today. And thank you, Anne, for your facilitation. You're calling in from the Netherlands, Albania, Panama, South Africa, Bosnia Herzegovina, and of course the United States and also Canada. So welcome and thank you again. Our next call is on January 16th on Indigenous Women's Sacred Teachings and Caring and Protecting Creation. And so stay tuned and mark your calendars for the 16th of January for our next Death Throes of Patriarchy series. And with that, Anne will close our circle.
Well, we will close our circle. So make sure you're not muted. Everybody unmute. Tehil, you're still muted. Okay, I think everybody's unmuted. Great. So just in one word, how has this experience been for you? And we'll start with Sandy because she's up in that corner, and then we'll go to Pat, and then we'll go to Sarah, and then we'll go to Hill. So we'll go there. Okay.
I need 3 words, exceeded and total expectations.
Okay, Pat.
My word is inspired.
Sarah.
Oh, I'm struggling with a word. I'll go with honored. Honored. Thank you.
Tehil.
Healing.
Renee.
Grateful.
Tiffany.
Hopeful.
Kala.
Inspiring.
Okay. Is it Elizabeth? No, yes.
Elisa.
Alisa.
I'm going to say grateful.
Okay. Baba.
Encouraging.
Heidi.
Healthful.
Sandra. Sandra, you get one.
Community.
Okay. Krishna.
Motivated.
Great. Emma.
Thought shifting.
Barbara.
Inspiring.
Mine is grateful. I'm going to blow out the candle. Our circle has now been closed, but is continually stays open, especially for our after party. But to know that this conversation will go on, and we'll look at having a resource that you can take to others. So open but not broken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it was so lovely sharing this space with you all.
Thank you all so much.
Krishna, I love that your word was motivating. You know, I love those action words. That's what we hope for. Yeah, all of the words were quite remarkable, but yeah, it's good to know that there's action.
It's by thy grace that I sing. It's by thy